Microsoft dropped new earnings data, and Xbox had one heck of a year. Today, Microsoft released their Q4 earnings, which is the wrapping up of their fiscal year 22, and they had a pretty good year. Now, the headlines are going to tell a different story, but let's just dive into the details as they pertain mostly to Xbox. So what did Microsoft report today? They reported they had $51.9 billion in revenue and $16.7 billion dues going into the bank. Net income is what they put into the bank, and they can spend on other things like Activision. And so for that time period, revenue was up 12% and net income was roughly flat, but it was still up about 2%. Now, where the headlines are going to come in negative is for Team Xbox, because as Microsoft reported today, Xbox side, the hardware revenue fell about 11%, and there was a 6% dip in content and service revenue. And reminder, that's where Microsoft wants to talk about, they want to focus on that data rather than necessarily the hardware. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. First off, the console launched a couple years ago at this point, and so console sales are going to continue roughly expected to decline year over year. That's sort of the natural progression of how these things work. But during the press call, or earnings call, I should say, Satya Nadella said, "In gaming, we've sold more consoles life to date than any previous generation of Xbox, and we have been the market leader in North America for 3 quarters in a row among next-gen consoles." So very clearly that Microsoft believes that they are in a good position, and there's some data that we'll talk about here in a second that really does back that up. He goes on to say during this quarter, Microsoft partnered with Epic Games. You may have heard of a game called Fortnite, and he says, to make Fortnite available for free via the browser. Over 4 million people have streamed the game to date, including over 1 million who were new to the ecosystem. So just by enabling Fortnite streaming through the browser, they have attracted 1 million more people, I should say, to the Xbox ecosystem, which is obviously a place for growth and gives Microsoft a lot of opportunity. Now, with sales down and revenue down for the Xbox, you might be saying, "Oh, Brad, that's not so great." Well, first off, just broadly speaking, look at the world. I mean, Microsoft technically missed earnings, although they primarily missed it on foreign exchange currency fluctuations, but also Google, who also released their earnings today, did miss as well. The whole world is kind of just pumping the brakes, slowing things down. The economy is definitely starting to slow down, so these results aren't all that unexpected. But more importantly, doing some back of the napkin and Excel math, it looks like Microsoft made about $3.5 billion-ish in revenue for Xbox, and by my calculations and my running spreadsheet, it looks like this was, I believe, their second best quarter ever for Q4. So Microsoft is not they're not falling off a cliff here. This is one of their best quarters ever, especially when it comes to Q4. But here's the interesting part. This puts Microsoft or Xbox revenue at about $16.2 billion for the fiscal year, which I'm pretty confident in saying this was the best fiscal year ever for Xbox, ever. Xbox really did crush it. Now, we don't know the actual margins and if they made money on that, but we'd assume that things are probably trending in a good direction considering that they were to have their best fiscal year ever. And so that's really what you need to know. As the world kind of tosses and turns here and we try to figure out what's going on with the economy, Xbox appears to be in a pretty healthy place. At least last year, it had an exceptional fiscal year. Next year, this upcoming fiscal year, I think it's going to be challenging to potentially top that, but we will see. Microsoft is obviously trying to shove as many people as they can into Game Pass and try to jack up that revenue, or grow that revenue, I should say. We're not hearing anything about pricing increases yet. The other interesting thing will be knowing that hardware console sales are starting to wane a little bit and supply is starting to match demand. I'll be curious to see if we see any sales or discounts on the hardware. You can imagine the Xbox Series S price cut, potentially Series X price cut. At this point, we are not at the beginning of the generation, but we're moving along through the generation of the Xbox Series S and X, and if supply truly is matching demand, maybe now is the time. Although we have been hearing a lot, it really impacted PC sales for Microsoft, where the manufacturing lines are slowing down and they're having trouble getting things out the door. And so maybe we won't see it if inflation has truly raised the price to actually produce these consoles. Either way, the important takeaway here is that Microsoft is in an exceptionally healthy business right now. There's no concerns there. And Xbox appears to be doing pretty well. We will see what fiscal year 23 brings us. And if you want to make sure to keep updated about everything going on in the world of Xbox, from games to financial data, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.